Hi, I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where purpose-driven people like you learn how to craft and tell compelling stories to grow your revenue and amplify your impact. If you would like to clarify your story in under 30 minutes, visit me at businessofstory.com, because you gotta own your story to grow your brand.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
As a purpose-driven leader or a purpose-driven communicator that has a brand, an organization that is doing something, is answering a higher calling than just making money, how do you use storytelling to drive your people, to move them, to get them engaged and really digging what you're doing so that they can embrace it and live into a more powerful story? Well, that's what we are going to cover today. We're literally working with a rocket scientist on this. That's right. Joshua Spodek is the author of the best-selling book, Leadership Step by Step. He's earned such praise as Best and Brightest by Esquire magazine's Genius issue. He's been called astrophysicist turned new media whiz by NBC, and rocket scientist. Forbes magazine and ABC News deemed him one. Well, Spodek is a professor at NYU and columnist for Inc. magazine. He holds five Ivy League degrees, including a Ph.D. in astrophysics and an MBA, both from Columbia University, where he studied under a Nobel laureate. Yeah, that's right. We got a lot of brain power on today's show, and it's not mine, I'm telling you. Now, on today's show, you are going to learn that Josh has not only launched satellites as part of a multi-billion-dollar decade-plus mission led by the European Space Agency with NASA, but he's also invented a subterranean movie experience for subway riders. That's right, from the stars to the, well, subways. He holds 6 patents and co-founded and helped lead several education ventures, including partnering with New York City Public Schools. He has taught art at Parsons, the New School for Design, and NYU Tish's Interactive Telecommunications program. Man, I'm feeling stupid just reading this. Anyways, what we're going to focus on in today's show is how purpose-driven leaders can use his book and system called Leadership Step by Step to create a new story that your team can buy into to amplify your impact and drive revenue. Essentially, living into an epic adventure much like Spodek has appeared to be on his entire life. You are going to learn his meaningful connection exercise that will help you turn complete strangers into immediate advocates. You'll get to try his most efficient self exercise that has you embracing your inner monologue, good, bad, or indifferent. And finally, the one exercise that might freak you out the most, the authentic voice exercise. That's right, a lot of exercise using your brain on today's show. So let's get after it. And oh, by the way, Josh has a freebie for you at the end of the show, so certainly stay tuned for the whole thing. You are going to love it. But without further ado, let's dive in and welcome to the show, Joshua Spodek. Josh, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And you're coming to us where? From downtown Manhattan?
Yes, I live in Greenwich Village and I'm home right now.
Ah, very nice. And spring is upon you, moving into summer. It's got to be absolutely beautiful out there right now.
At last, yes, we had a long, chilly spring, and there's a good chance that after we finish, I have one more call after this, and there's a good chance I'm going to go for a run down by the river.
Ah, good for you. Good for you. Well, today I'm really glad to have you on the show because I want to explore this book that you wrote, Leadership Step by Step, Become the Person Others Follow. But really, after reading through your credentials and your history and your background and all that, I'm kind of wondering, why didn't you call it leadership? It's not rocket science.
Leadership, as it's at the if you really want to do extremely well at it, it's just a different part of the mind. It's not analytical. It's more thinking, and it's more doing and emotional and social skills. It can be difficult too.
Yeah, and you come at it from a very interesting perspective in your book. I love it because it's very applicable. I mean, I'm teaching a course at Arizona State University, a Communication Sustainable Storytelling course in the Executive Masters of Sustainability Leadership there. And the one thing, the mandate that really came down from Michael Crow's office, the president of the university, was this type of program, it needs to be not just theoretical, a little bit of theory, but man, you have to be able to allow these students to practice it the moment they've learned something to go and apply it. So I personally love that kind of learning. And in your book, you talk about how great performers, be they athletes or musicians, I mean, you even compare it to piano playing, that you don't teach a bunch of theory to piano players, you teach scales and exercises and you get them performing. And that's kind of how that world comes together with your world and leadership step by step.
I do want to refine something you said, that you don't teach them theory. Actually, I would say that you do teach them theory. You just don't lecture theory. You don't give them a bunch of papers to read about it. You don't have them watch TED Talks on it. Because the scales, like it's taking piano lessons. A scale isn't just randomly hitting keys on a keyboard. It's specific keys in a specific order in a specific way. So there is actually a lot of theory, but the thing is that the teacher or the coach knows the theory, and you don't lecture at it. You give someone experience with the theory baked in. So the scales, I don't know a whole lot of musical history, but I think that they developed over a long period of time. And what I saw missing in leadership was the equivalent of scales. But lots of fields have things where you learn things starting with the basics. Like when you start to learn to play tennis, you start with ground strokes. You don't start with the serve, even though the game starts with the serve, because the serve is really hard. And so you start with these basics. And right now we're looking at the NBA finals. And when you start learning to play basketball, you learn jump shots and you learn layups and you learn how to dribble. And before the game begins with the finals, with the best players in the game, they're still practicing jump shots and layups, not because they don't know how to do it, but because practicing basics is, you never go wrong practicing the basics, practicing the fundamentals.
Well, and you come about this in a very interesting manner to me. So very learned. I mean, you've got a Ph.D. in astrophysics and an MBA from Columbia University. You helped with some space work. You had literally some rocket ship satellites orbiting above, and you ended up in the subways with a motion picture advertising company. Can you give us a quick little backstory of how this very interesting background has led you to writing your book, Leadership Step by Step?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly give the context is that growing up, in college, I was like, I love physics and I just love it. And it's difficult socially to major in it because people don't really know how to talk about it. And it's not like you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, but at some point you're like, I love it and I want to do it. So when I went into graduate school, I realized that I didn't really like the practice of it. And so I still love physics as much as ever, but I don't really want to be a researcher working in labs. I think 100 years ago, it was a different story. You actually did work with stuff. Mm-hmm. Now it's programming. And anyway, so I didn't really like that. So it happened that I was in grad school. Some friends of mine were talking about starting a company, and they invited me to join them for beers just to, talk about, see if we come up with any ideas. And it came up with an idea that ended up being what we started. And I didn't intend for that to happen. I stumbled into both the idea. There's some optics in it, but basically we put boxes on the walls of subway tunnels that when the train goes by, it looks like a movie screen outside the subway car window. And so, my background in optics certainly helped there. My background in lab work helped me prototyping and things like that. But I really didn't know what happened. I loved entrepreneurship. I really loved developing a passion and pursuing it and having a team and things like that.
So wait, I got to understand the physics of the sub-media, those motion pictures. So essentially, you had boxes of images on the wall, and instead of the film moving and those boxes moving by a stationary audience, you were the audience in a moving subway, and so you get the same effect of motion?
Exactly. Yeah, wow. I mean, when you're in a movie theater, the film, now it's all digital, but before the film was moving fast and you were sitting still. Now the trick is, in a movie projector, there's a shutter that opens and closes. Mm-hmm. And there's no shutter in a tunnel. So there's some optics. There's a I'm not going to go into the details, but if you want me to, I will. But the optics and how the shutter works is the real challenge, and that's what we worked out.
Yeah, no, I just think it's kind of fascinating, just turning the whole mechanism on its head. Instead of the film moving, you're moving, but you get that same sense. Anyways, keep rolling.
So, so that takes me from physics to entrepreneurship. What takes me to entrepreneurship to leadership is that, I guess, all right, I'm going to say this briefly. If you want me to go into it, I can. But I got squeezed out of the company by the investors when we were in a recession in the early 2000s, post 9/11, and physics is great for a lot of things, but it doesn't really help you in really difficult times running a business. And I didn't have what I thought at the time was I lacked some of the business skills. And it took me a while to realize that the business skills weren't just how to read a balance sheet and how to do finance, but it was how to listen to people, how to learn what their needs were and motivate them and get them, into difficult times to get together and get the job done. And so I went to business school because I knew I wanted to keep starting businesses, and I didn't want my inexperience to hold me back. In business school, I stumbled in. I took leadership classes and found out that you didn't have to be born with it. You could learn it. And in the 10, 12 years since, it's become a passion of mine to, after school, I learning about leadership is not the same as learning to practice leadership. What we were talking about before about the difference between theory and practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started diving into first learning it on my own through practice. And then people in my life they picked up that I was changing in ways that weren't just, I had new facts or knowledge, which is what traditional education gives you, but I was changing as a person. And they said, you should coach, you should lead seminars, and you should write stuff about this. And the more that I practiced it, eventually I started realizing how to teach more effectively. And that led me to borrow from these other fields of music and dance and sports, how to take how they learn and apply it here.
So you were a Ph.D. astrophysicist first, did all of that, and then went back, got your MBA, and learned the principles around leadership?
Yeah. And to me, when I finished the PhD, I didn't expect ever to be back in school again after that. Most people don't. But it was just that it was a really difficult experience, not knowing how to run a business, but also knowing that I wanted to keep running businesses. So I did really well at the beginning of developing the technology and prototyping, even getting investors on board. But the really stressful times, I was a ship at sea, sad to say.
Yeah. No, well, I don't think you're alone at that. I think it's really fascinating of the education that you got. And now you find yourself, I guess, in the street smarts of business and applying your MBA to it. So what ultimately led you to writing the book, Leadership Step by Step?
There are a few things. One was, by far the biggest thing was the responses that I got from my clients and my students, which were consistently, I never knew that I could learn stuff like this. I didn't know that there could be courses like this. I'd like more courses like this. And so with a course at a university, I guess my biggest class was probably 40 students. So a few dozen students at a time, but I'm not going to get to 7 billion that way. So that led me to create my online courses, which were independent of the university. Actually, I'd started the online courses before the in-person courses, but NYU offered for me to teach with them and I took them up. So I put that on hold. And then the book makes it more accessible to a lot more people. And the other thing was that writing a book is not an easy thing to do. It's a lot of work. And I luckily had an agent who was really great and helping me edit. And one of her big things was, Josh, you got to put some stories in here. Because at the beginning, it was just, here's what to do. Here are the exercises. Do the exercises. Take for granted that they're going to work. And a lot of people come back and tell me that the stories are some of the best parts of it. But still, I wouldn't have done it like the pain of sitting at a desk and your butt hurts and your shoulders hurt and you could be out doing other stuff. And it's so easy to put off. But every time I passed a bookshelf and I would pick up a new book on leadership, I would scan through and I'd ask myself, is this a book about leadership or is this a book that will help you learn to lead? And every single book that I read was a book on leadership about it. It was as if there's a whole world of people who were telling you that there's value in lifting weights if you want to get strong. And everyone's reading books, but no one's actually lifting weights.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get strong from reading about lifting weights.
So where did you find the stories that you used? And I would imagine your agent was sitting there saying, look, I'm working with a really sharp guy, smart guy here. He knows his stuff. He's writing theoretically. It seems to make sense, but we're missing the human element. We're missing that left brain or right brain emotional human element. Where did you go about finding your stories that then really brought your book to life?
The stories were always there. It was from working with clients. Some of them were from my own life. And some are, Mandela figures heavily into it. And so historical great leaders, or effective leaders. What the issue wasn't were the stories there. It was, can Josh tell them in a way that's engaging and entertaining and enlightening? Because originally, she was the one where I heard show, don't tell. And all my stuff at the beginning was very not engaging, very fact driven, but not a lot of tension. And it was really writing them over and over and over again. And now I look back and I can pick up some of the early stuff of how, I don't know any other way to put it. It was poorly written. And I think I write better now. I mean, I think that I have a long way to go. I mean, I'll read like some really, I'm now Nabokov, that stuff is amazing. I'm getting closer. Of course, my goal is really to motivate people to do stuff. My goal is to get people to want to do things. And so I try to bring out in the stories some change in someone's life that was brought about by them taking action and that gave a result that they liked. And trying to face that the reason people don't do stuff is often not because they don't see the value in it. It's that they're motivation issues. It's how do you get people to want to do something that they know will help them, but it's easier to just keep doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, status quo. In that every great story is really around shaking your protagonist out of status quo. Sitting around eating potato chips on the couch watching TV is not much of a story until the house catches on fire.
And it doesn't get you off the couch reading about someone else not getting off the couch.
Unless they can live vicariously through that person not getting off the couch when the fire goes off. And they go, oh, you know what? That triggers a story in my mind that I actually have to do something about this. So share with us one of the stories from your books, one of the surprising moments in your book that maybe caught you by surprise, that you came back, you wanted to illustrate a point you had made about leadership, and you found that moment, whether it's in your life or leader's life, a client's life, that you put in the book, and it just surprisingly came together beautifully for you.
I have to start with the one that opens the book, which is that I'll give some context. There was I've never been. I spent most of my life not particularly skilled at making connections with people. I remember in college when I'd be at bars with friends, I thought that everyone who knew each other at a bar knew each other before they got there, or else was introduced by someone. I didn't know that people could meet new people because I had no ability to. It was looking back, I'm like, of course they're meeting it. Like, I didn't know how people met. I just thought they knew each other from class or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, so after business school, I saw that a speaker the author of a book was speaking on a panel at the new school near me. So a university talk, a panel discussion. And I thought, this book really meant a lot to me. I want to meet this guy and tell him I really appreciate his book. So I go to the talk, and when it ends, then all the panelists come down and they're mixing with the audience and everyone's talking. So I was really nervous about talking to this guy. So I go up to him, I work up all this nerve, and by the way, this is after business school. So I know from school, network. That's like one of the big things from business school. It's like network like crazy. So I'm thinking I'm going to network with this guy. So I don't really have the skills to talk to people, but I've worked up the nerve. And I go up to him and I say, I liked your book. I wanted to tell you how much it meant to me. And I want to thank you for making this available to me. Something like that. And he says, well, thank you. And I used up all my everything to say that. I didn't know what to say next. So I stood there looking at him, thinking to myself, what do I say now? Don't let too much time pass. You better say something. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. Better say something. I don't know what to say. Better say something. And I just stood there, and I don't know if it was a minute or 10 minutes or maybe a year. And I just go, well, thanks. Great to meet you. Bye. And shook his hand and walked away. And my friend who was with me just started laughing. And she was like, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen. The two geeks just looking at each other, not knowing what to say or do.
It couldn't be more awkward. I'm with you. I've done the exact same thing. All right, keep going.
Okay, so now fast forward to my mentor is Marshall Goldsmith. He's top #1 best-selling author, #1 leadership thinker, Harvard Business Review, all this. He's like top of the field. And he's been a mentor of mine for a long time. His mentor is Frances Hesselbein. And she was the CEO of the Girl Scouts. She won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Peter Drucker said about her, she was the best leader in America. So I met her through him. And when I met her, she invites me to have coffee with her. So I don't say no. Of course, I'm going to take her up on that. By the way, this is years afterward. This is after I've been teaching for a while. In particular, after I've developed an exercise called Meaningful Connection, which is how to make a meaningful connection with people, because it's such an important thing to be able to do, is to connect with someone and not just be like, how's the weather? Or what do you do for a living?
And did that section of your book come out of that awkward story you just told? Was that where you're like, I've got to get my own act together, and what you learned in that process you share with your readers?
Yes, I wish I could say it was just from that one unique experience, but that experience was one of many, many experiences where I was making awkward, not meaningful connections.
Well, and that's what makes your book so deep. So, okay, go ahead. Now you're with Frances.
Well, I'm not yet with Frances. I met her at this book event of Marshall's. She says, come to my office. Or she says, would you like to meet? And I say, of course. So between that, when I see her in person and when we meet, a couple of weeks go by. And in that time, I'm thinking, what do I talk to her about? What do I talk to her about? And I don't want to ask her about her books. I don't want to ask her about stuff that I can find out on my own. I don't want to ask her stuff that everyone asks. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've been teaching this meaningful connection exercise all this time. I just have to do meaningful connection with her. And it's funny because most people, at least certainly me, when someone's high status, it makes you forget how to talk. It makes me awkward. Mm-hmm. But I'd practiced this exercise so many times that I felt confident. And I knew that I knew that I could just do what I'd practiced many, many times. So
Can you quickly tell us what that exercise is before you tell us the outcome of the story?
Yeah, there's a script to it. And it's most people remember just the very beginning, which is to say to someone, I like to say, what's a passion of yours? What's your passion? Or what's a hobby of yours? What's something you'd like to do? Now, that's not the only piece of it. Someone will usually give an answer that's what I call a cocktail party answer. They'll say something indicating what they like, but they won't go into much depth because they don't know. Maybe you're going to judge them. Maybe you're going to laugh at them. They're vulnerable. If sharing what you care about makes you vulnerable. So the next step is to respond. And there's a script, so I'm going to be a little vague here. But it's to respond in a way that you connect what they do to people in your life, and you speak about the people in your life who do something similar to them in a supportive, non-judgmental way, where the communication is both the details about your friends that you mentioned, but the subtext is, I support this type of behavior. And the feeling on the other person's side that I can say from my experience of people doing the exercise back to me is, oh, this person, they like this sort of thing. This is someone I can share this stuff about. So the next response you get from people is usually a lot more in depth. And there's a little bit after that, but it's to get that in-depth talk is about something that they really care about. And then you respond again in a supportive way. And that support gets them to share more, and you make a meaningful connection, because meaning is in the emotions that people share. And
you are essentially establishing common ground, that we have something in common.
Yeah, I guess so. It does look that way from the other person. The thing is, you don't necessarily have to have something in common with them. You just have to show support. So it could be complementary. That often happens. Sometimes someone will have something that I found fascinating. Like one of the stories I talk about is, I was doing this actually with a professor at Columbia. He was asking me about this technique. And I said, all right, let's do the exercise. And so I asked him what his passion is. And he says, falconry. I've never heard of falconry before. I don't know what falconry is. And it turns out, I later found out from him, is that it's hunting with a bird of prey. So you get this big leather glove, and the hawk goes out and like chases down a rabbit and pulls it back to you. So I'm a vegetarian. I'm not into hunting. I have no idea how to connect with this, except when I do the exercise, he says, hunt falconry. And I'm thinking, I can't talk about anyone. I don't know what falconry is. I haven't heard what I just said, what it is. I didn't know that yet. But yet I got to do this exercise. So I just took birds. I said, all right, I talked to a friend of mine who has a cat, a friend of mine who has a dog. And so it was really not a whole lot of overlap, but it was close enough for him, because it's a passion of his. As long as I was close and supportive, it gave him the opportunity to talk more about falconry. And to this day, when I see him, I can talk about falconry, and he's like, oh yeah, that conversation. It's really, these connections will endure for a long time. Probably, I think a lot because most people don't show support early on. Talking about the weather, sports, travel, that stuff is often designed not to go to where people are vulnerable in order to prevent awkward things from happening, but it also prevents deep connections from happening.
All right. So you want to go to where people are vulnerable. How did you use this with Frances?
So I get to her office and I walk in, and her office is incredible. It's around the top of the office are books of hers that are all translated. They're like framed because they're all in different languages. So you can see how worldly her books are. And then there's pictures of her with Reagan, with Clinton, with Obama. And she's done a lot of work with the military. So you see her with all these generals, with all these stars. And in fact, on the way in, the guy at the door downstairs, the security guy for the building, was like, "Oh yeah, General Shinseki, he was just through here the other day." And I'm like, if I wasn't prepared, I would have no idea what to say. And there's gleaming swords. It's really an incredible place. And so her assistant sits me on the couch, and she pulls up a chair, and she's sitting in front of me. Maybe her face is 2 feet from mine. And she turns to me with a smile, very gracious. And she says to me, "So what would you like to talk about?" Now, so what would you like to talk about is basically saying you figure out, you lead, you make the conversation interesting. But she invited me. If I were not prepared, I would have no idea what to say. It was like, it would have been very awkward. Instead, I said, now in her case, I didn't say, "What's your passion?" because I knew I wanted to talk about leadership. So I said, "I understand leadership is a passion of yours. Is that right?" She says, "Of course." And then I say, well, I talk about people in my life. I talk about myself and Marshall and what we do for leadership. And I say, "So what is it for you?" Which is the next step. I'm kind of skipping over the details. And she then talks for, I don't know, a while. Like she just goes into talking about it. And in particular, she talks about to serve is to live. And the next thing is to pick up on their language and respond using the language that they use. So I started asking her, what does it mean to serve? What does it mean to live? And this one beginning, we really just doing this exercise went probably half an hour, maybe an hour, which led to lunch, which led to keeping going until 3 hours later. And by the way, we were scheduled for 30 minutes. 3 hours later, her assistant came in and said, "Ms. Hesselbein, I apologize for interrupting, but your next appointment is here, and I have to insist that your next appointment is here and you got to take it." And Frances said to me, "I don't remember a more delightful conversation."
Wow.
Now, and lest you think that this was just about having conversations, business happened in this meeting. In particular, she invited me to write for her journal, which is the Leader to Leader journal, which is very prestigious. And I think this month or maybe next month is when my first piece in that journal is going to come out. She put me in touch with people at West Point, and I've been invited now to speak at West Point. So it's a meaningful connection. Is not just a nice conversation. It's also, to me, that's business. It's business in the best sense of the word, of doing things for each other to make our lives better and understanding what helps each other and to do those things.
Now, obviously, you did not learn these techniques. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions here, but with your MBA from Columbia, that these are techniques that you learn by trial and error, finding yourself in those vulnerable situations. How did they all come together to create a book? I mean, you've really gone from theory now into true storytelling to connect people.
There are a lot of threads that came together. The two biggest ones. Well, one I've already mentioned. Marshall Goldsmith has technique. His technique is often exercise based. He is. If you look up Marshall Goldsmith, feed forward. It's a pun on feedback. It's an exercise that he developed, and he outright says, "I've based almost my entire career on this," and he's like the number one in the field. And he's got a few exercises that are simple, quick to learn, not necessarily easy to implement, but you learn. I'm still learning from these exercises decades, or at least more than a decade after I've learned them. And that was a model for me of giving exercises that had this effect. If you learn from them, they're taken from the practice of leadership. And likewise, in all these other fields, you have also exercises. Like if you do improv, yes and, that's an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And like in basketball, you do jump shots. And so he had things that came from leadership, not just from other areas. What he didn't have was a progression of exercises. So there's one here, one there, one here, one there. And in my practice, I started finding that one exercise that I created would lead to another exercise, and that would lead to another exercise. And so I started stringing them together. I took what he did and maybe, what's the right word? Generalized it or made it more,
you connected the dots.
Exactly.
You gave it a flow.
Perfect.
So you get people, when I'm looking at the contents in your book, you've got really 4 units as you spelled out here: understanding yourself, leading yourself, understanding others, and leading others. One of the exercises in here, and I believe it's in chapter 3 of Understanding Yourself, your inner monologue. And this was captivating to me, and I'd like for you to share this exercise with our listeners, because one of the big things that drives me, one of my passions, if you and I were to run into that cocktail party and you came up and asked me, is to help people live into their most powerful stories. And yet our inner monologue, mine included, quite often is powerful in a very dark direction, in a negative direction, and you have to catch yourself in that area and turn that around and see the other side of the coin, the positive side of it. And I think it's that inner monologue exercise that's pretty fascinating.
It was one of the great exercises for me in my life. And I write about it on my blog. If people look up on my blog, the most effective self-awareness exercise that I know, I believe that's the title of the blog post. That's what I call this exercise casually, because it is, at least it is the most effective self-awareness exercise that I know. And it's very simple. And by the way, I didn't make it up. I got it from Sri Kumar Rao, whose course I took in business school. And this was a class that was actually experiential. So it wasn't that I learned a lot from him. And I don't know where he got that. I don't know if he made the exercise up or if he got it from somewhere, but I got it from him. And it's very simple. Here's what you do. For 1 week, every day, carry with you a piece of paper and something to write with, a pen. You can make it your notepad or something, if that's your easiest way of writing. And several times a day, write down your inner monologue, the exact words going through your head. And usually when I assign this in class, I ask someone, what are you thinking right now? And invariably, they'll say something like, well, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do later. What they say is what they're thinking about. And that's not what to write down. What to write down is actually your actual thoughts. It's just something more like, oh, he just called on me to say what I'm thinking. What am I thinking? I don't know what I'm thinking. I can't really tell. What should I say? I guess I'm thinking about what I'll do later. That flow of words, I hope it sounds familiar. I can't just perfectly replicate it, but that flow is actually what's going through your head. And most people, I can't speak for most people, but for me, until I did that exercise, I never noticed the words in my head, even though that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like fish in water. Like, you don't notice it because it's just so permeating your world that you don't notice how your mind actually works. And so doing it reveals so many things. It reveals that there's different parts of your mind, because there's a part observing it and there's another part thinking it. The part thinking it, it's got some autopilot going on because you can't stop it. It's kind of like breathing. If you pay attention, you can kind of breathe how you want, but if you don't pay attention, it reverts back to its normal way of doing things. And then you pointed out that it's dark or negative, judgmental. Basically everyone who's ever done the exercise that I've talked to has said that they found out that their thoughts were more judgmental and more negative than they expected. I did. And only later did I realize, if everyone feels that way, then it's not me that's a judgmental person. It's the human mind is judgmental. And it works that way. Kind of like there's a part of my mind that periodically sticks a song in my head and it won't go away. I don't ask for it to be there. I don't want it to be there. I'd like for it to go away if I could, but that's not what my mind does. My mind does its thing. And the same thing with judgment, that, you walk along, you see someone do something that you think is whatever, you judge. Mm-hmm. The judgment happens, then you see that it happened. That to me is a very liberating experience and realization, because now suddenly I don't feel so bad about being so judgmental. I feel human for being judgmental, and I don't mind being human.
So what do you do to trigger yourself to write these down? Is it something that just kind of occurs to you, and so at the moment you drop everything and write down what's going on in your head at that moment?
Yeah, I've done the exercise. The first time I did it was about 10 years ago, and I do it periodically since then. And yeah, you just basically, I got a free second, I'll write it down. I mean, if some people will put an alarm on their phone or something like that so that it will get them to do it at random times. Because I have noticed, I still to this day wonder, do I always think these thoughts? Because when I pause to look, yes, it's always there. But maybe there are times when I'm really excited, like when I'm playing sports, or maybe it's not there, but I don't have the presence of mind to check, so I can't really tell. weird stuff about awareness. I've also meditated a fair amount. And when you meditate, you also become aware of this stuff. You're just noticing it.
So how many times a day do you stop yourself to capture this inner monologue? And then what do you do with it? You've got this stuff down and you've got this now awareness like, oh my God, I'm pretty much a judgmental SOB. What do I do with that knowledge?
Well, I recommend writing 3 or 4 times a day. The goal is really to get over the hump. At the beginning, you're drinking from a fire hose. You can't write nearly as fast as you can think. And as you start writing, your thoughts are changing. So you have to pick up this. For me, the way I do it is I capture a thought. And then as my mind goes on to other things, I write down that memory of what those thoughts were that I captured right there. So I'm writing what I thought maybe 5 seconds earlier. Then once you get over that hump, then you don't have to write down as much, but you have to keep writing until you get to the point where you can identify, these are my thoughts. Now you said I'm a judgmental SOB. I would say that my mind has a judgmental part that I can't stop. And it's going to do its thing. Meanwhile, there's other parts of me. And so when I see that judgment going, I let it go. I follow it. Sometimes I get caught up in it. And to me, people who meditate get that skill, but I find that writing, in my experience, the activity of writing makes it more active, makes it more effective. Now, it doesn't achieve other things that meditation does, but I find this one exercise is, in a fraction of the time, gets me a lot of the value. And I'm not saying don't meditate. By all means, meditate if that's what you want to do. But this gives something a lot quicker. Then what you can do with it, the big thing for me is it liberates you. It lets you know that it's not you that's this way. It's your mind that's this way. And that to me is like a big shackle off of me. It's a mental jail that I'm freed from.
So you can stop beating yourself up over it. Stop judging yourself over being judgmental.
Yes. And then if you're going in a leadership direction, my book then takes you, and my course takes you through a series of exercises to follow, which build on, after you've written at the word level what's going through your head, then it's right at the belief level, because the beliefs that you have tend to manifest themselves in your thoughts. So once you have a handle on your thoughts, it gives you a handle onto the next level up of your beliefs. Once you have access to your beliefs, then you can start changing your beliefs and recognizing how your beliefs influence your perception. And so I have other exercises on that. The big exercise that it leads to that people love, but oh man, the first time I assign it, people are so scared, as was I. So the exercise is to, and I'm going to say it now, and it'll probably sound like, whoa, that's too hard for almost everyone who hears this. And it probably is. And that's why I have all these intermediate exercises in between to build up to it. But I call it the authentic voice exercise. And it's to speak the inner monologue as it's going through your head. And that's a big deal for a lot of people, because people are afraid, like, oh, I'm going to insult someone, or I'm going to say something like sexist or something like that, without realizing that there's a reason for the filter. And across the board, people have the opposite experience, that sometimes, and I say, if you want to practice by yourself in your room, just like facing the wall so no one else can hear you, practice that way. That's fine. Then maybe work up to a mirror, then maybe work up to doing it on camera. But eventually, like to the undergrads, I say, by the next week, make sure you've done it a few times, probably like once a day. And they come back and they say, I was really scared to do it, but once I started doing it, I found myself saying things that I never said before, and they were very genuine and authentic. And the big thing is that when they say it to others, others pick up on it, and others respond back, speaking openly and genuinely. And it's a big example. It's one of the first examples in the course where you leading yourself ends up leading others as well, through authenticity, through genuineness, through people seeing you're not faking anything. You can tell when someone's speaking from without that filter. It does take practice.
A couple things on this then. You start by writing them down just to kind of get yourself in this mode of capturing these thoughts that are just flying through your head. And then you move to this authentic voice exercise where you stop, it pops into your head, and then you repeat them out loud. First, maybe in the privacy and comfort and safety of your own room, but then you get to the point you open up to sharing this in the mirror and to other people. So like I would just be sitting across from my wife, Michelle, and at the chosen moment, something goes through my head, and then I just repeat to her what just went through my head?
Yep. Except there's more than one exercise in between. There's probably 5 or 6 or 7 exercises in between.
Gotcha.
Each more facility with this. The first unit is understand yourself. So understand yourself spends a lot of time on that inner monologue. That gives you access to how your mind works, how you perceive things, how your beliefs influence your perception, how your inner monologue relates with your beliefs. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in between.
Yeah. Well, and how this plays to me, I'm writing madly down here, not what just went through my head, but just making notes as we go. You don't want to hear what's going through my head right now. I got to work on that, find that authentic voice. But it speaks to the power of storytelling. The greatest stories we tell are absolute, authentic, true stories, well told. They typically share something about us, a morality or a belief or a value that we hold dear that could be, spoken explicitly, or it could be implicit within the story. And that's what connects us to people. That's where we do find that common ground that there's safety in this person. They understand where I'm coming from because of that particular story. But as soon as we get authentic in the telling of that story, man, our BS monitors go up. They're like reflector-deflector shields from Star Trek for our audiences. And they can sense it, I suppose, at the most basal level. That reptilian brain, the controlling fight or flight, senses that BS. So I can see where this authentic story and getting your inner monologue, I can't say under control because you never truly control it, do you? You appreciate what it's about, how that tape is constantly running there, and you only honor it or give it as much power as it needs. But to be real with it then allows you to find your own true voice and be more authentic and connect on that level.
I wish I'd recorded that. Oh, wait, this is being recorded. You said it exactly.
Can I be an astrophysicist? I've always wanted to. I don't think I've got the cranial power to pull that off.
So the next step is just actually the doing. And the doing is where it all happens, because you can talk about it all you want, but when you actually do it is when you face these emotional and social challenges. Yeah. Actually, the longest quotation in my book is I quoted one of my students, and she did this exercise over spring break. She was an undergrad. She was with some friends going to the beach. It was like a road trip. And she had known them since high school. And she was driving along. And there's an inner monologue that you have when you drive. I haven't driven in a long time living in Manhattan. But it's, oh, should I shift lanes? Oh, what's that guy in front of me doing? Am I going to have to slow down? I don't want to slow down. Do I have to brake really hard? All right, let's shift back up in a different gear, or let's drive along. Should I make left? Wait, have I gone to? I don't know. It's been a while since I've driven, so I can't really make that up. But yep. Right? That sounds familiar, right?
Right.
So, I can't quote her directly right now. It's not off the top of my head, but she's basically doing that. It's nighttime. She thinks that everyone else in the car is asleep, and she starts having saying that kind of stuff out loud. Turns out they weren't asleep. They hear her talking, and they start talking back. And that dialogue that came out of this, she said that even though she'd known them for years, they started talking about things that they'd never talked about before. And even later when they were at the beach, this was at nighttime, so in the car. So later on there at the beach, it kept going, and it opened things up in a way that never had happened before, even though they'd known each other for years.
Amazing. Amazing. The book is Leadership Step by Step, Become the Person Others Follow. Josh, I want to come back and cover the other 3 units quickly with you, but I would like to take a break here for a couple of other stories. And when we do come back, let's talk about that Unit 2, Leading Yourself. All right, let's cover that right after these messages. Last month found me presenting to the annual gathering of entertainment marketers at the Promax BDA conference in downtown LA. Now, thousands of TV, network, and movie marketers were in attendance, honing their skills for selling media through every imaginable channel of media, both online and off. They invited me to share my unique approach to story marketing, which I actually found a little ironic. The story marketer teaching story marketing to people who market stories for a living. Well, and much to my delight, it was a packed house. I mean, these people were packed. They had to bring in extra chairs, and they actually flowed out into the foyer. It was wonderful. And they were a great audience. Well, one of my story marketing examples in their industry that you can certainly learn from is Pixar and its new Khan Academy training series called The Art of Storytelling. As is everything on the Khan Academy, Pixar's course is absolutely free, and it's fun, man. It's really wonderful. So I had taken the course a week or so before my presentation, and it was really, really fun. They teach you storytelling techniques by exploring how they approach every aspect of storytelling at Pixar. Now, the first 3 modules are complete, including developing characters and the do's and don'ts of a proper story structure. Coming modules include visual language, film grammar, and storyboarding. Now, if you have an interest in becoming a better storyteller, then take the Khan Academy course. Pixar reveals the storytelling alchemy that goes into their animated epics, and it's fun to see how some of your favorite movies like Toy Story, The Incredibles, and WALL-E, how they come together. You'll find it's the same basic story structure, the hero's journey, if you will, that you can use in your own work and in your own life. And by the way, it's the same basic structure and story map that I use for my story cycle system. And yet, I doubt any of their Khan Academy students, including yours truly, will become the next big storyteller at Pixar. That's not their point in this. This is a nice bit of story marketing that invites students and moviegoers into Pixar's inner sanctum, reveal a little bit of their story magic, taught you by their own story artists to inspire and entice their fans. Pixar does a brilliant job of entertaining, educating, and engaging with their art of storytelling. And I bet those who take the course will experience a deeper connection to the Pixar movies they watch, which I would imagine will lead to greater loyalty for the brand. And for that, Pixar earns my Story Marker of the Week. So if you want to have a little fun and open up your world to storytelling, go over to the Khan Academy and take their course. I think you'll really like it. In fact, I'll put a link to the course in the show notes. I can't thank you enough for listening to my Business of Story podcast. Your notes, tweets, and emails telling me how this program and our amazing guests have helped you live into a more powerful story make it all worthwhile. And yet, coming to you in audio only is the most one-dimensional way I can imagine to reignite within you the one true superpower we all possess, storytelling. So, picture me with you live. That's right, I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the power of story marketing, and I'm ready to do this for you and your people. You can book me for keynotes and workshops, brand story strategy consulting, and live webinars. You can also join me for free every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time on Facebook Live. During my weekly show, I review the smart story marketers who are making an impact every day with their business storytelling. I take you through an element of the story cycle system that you can immediately apply to your brand story. And I offer up a free tool, tip, or technique that will help you clarify your brand story and rise above the noise of the attention economy. Just follow me on Facebook or join our private group called the Business of Story Raconteurs. We'd love to have you be a part of our story marketing family. So let me help you get your story on by visiting my speaker page at businessofstory.com and start crafting and telling compelling stories that sell. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest today, Josh Spodek, author of Leadership Step by Step. Great book, fascinating, and I love the fact that in this book you do have theory, as you mentioned, but there are so many applications, so many exercises that the reader can do. Just start leveling you up as a storyteller first by appreciating your inner monologue, your inner stories and beliefs, and then how you share those with others. Before we get into the next unit of leading yourself and moving on from there, what did you learn from your agent when he or she came back to you and said, Josh, this is beautiful. We need more stories. You wrote some stories, and earlier in the show, you said, boy, they weren't very good and had to write and rewrite. And I was thinking, that's okay. I mean, everything we write is pretty much crap at first, but at least we're capturing the moment, we're capturing the story, then we go back and edit it. Did you find in adding stories within your book that there became a formula or format or template that worked really well in telling of those stories?
Let's see. Yes, I can tell you, I definitely remembered about halfway through writing the book, something started opening up that before that, I felt like I was writing what I was supposed to, or I was trying to write what I was supposed to. And after that, I started writing what I wanted to write, what I felt was my message. And now I've gone back and edited the beginning, so you can't see the difference anymore. But she picked up on that because I was sending it to my editor, but my agent I was also sending it to. Definitely at the beginning, you can say I'm happy, or you can say I'm smiling ear to ear. And I was doing a lot of saying, I'm happy. And it was just telling about stuff, but not actually what was happening. And like when I was telling you about walking into Frances Hesselbein's office, I don't know how this sounds to other people, but like to know that those books were up there and that the swords were gleaming and that there were pictures of her with the presidents, to me, I find that more engaging than she's a very important person. She was had pictures with famous people. And to know that actually an interesting thing is Reagan, Obama, Clinton, George H.W. Bush, but not George W. Bush. And I've never asked her about that. But to me, that's like an interesting detail that I didn't put in the book, but I think would make a story intriguing. Like, that's interesting. Every president except that one. I think Carter, maybe not Ford, I forget. But I mean, I tried to give something about the character of who the people are. At the beginning, it was more descriptive of like what they look like. And I've tried to make it, I got a long way to go.
Talking about, it sounded like you were talking about what happened versus the happenstance, what's happening around you, and invite that audience in to let them connect the dots. So it's not enough, when you just say she's important, that's just your opinion. You're stating an opinion. But when you start talking about the leaders that came through there, the books, the surroundings, the people, the images shown, that tells us she's important, and it allows the reader, allows the story audience to connect the dots.
Yeah, something that she would say a lot to me was, consider yourself the director, like as if in a movie, and paint the scene for someone so that they can see it. Because if you don't tell it, they don't know. And then it's just flat and wooden. But if you tell them in a way that makes it come alive, then it will come alive.
Yeah, word portraits. And give metaphor. Give them an idea that they can read in their own subtext to it.
And so I mean, I'm saying what she said to me, and I think I got more skilled at it. I think I got better at it. It's hard for me to say. There was a lot of editing, a lot of rewriting that at levels that I hadn't gone to before. So that's maybe sounds mechanical, but my whole practice is based on doing and practicing, and the more you practice, the more skills you develop.
In leadership too, in connecting and leadership communications, there's this thing that popped up that I learned about. I don't even remember where I learned about it, but I love it. Have you heard about the fundamental attribution error?
Yes.
It's a fascinating thing that we do as people. We have this tendency to explain someone's behavior basically based on internal factors such as, their personality or disposition. Basically, we are just simply making assumptions about them, and we tend to underestimate the the influence of external factors, of what's happening to them. So it is so critical in leadership storytelling, and I think you cover it beautifully in this book, is to be able to articulate that story so people truly understand where you're coming from, and they're not making this fundamental attribution error about you. They're not assuming stuff about you that simply isn't true.
Yeah, I think the counter to that is empathy, is to be able to feel what another person feels. And I try to develop develop empathy, give people, I view empathy as a skill, a social skill, an emotional skill that you can learn like other skills. And if you practice it, you develop it. And when you just look at people's behavior and just presume they're doing that because that's what they want to do, you miss out of the richness and complexity of the person. And when you get that richness and complexity in the context of leadership, it gives you the ability to lead them. It gives you the ability to create intimacy so that they open up and share with you. And the lack of it is just a big thing that motivated me was many years ago. There was a short period of time when 3 different people all said to me, in their own words, "I've known you for a long time, but I still don't feel like I really know the real you." And that was really not a pleasant thing for me to hear. I felt like that sucks to know people for a long time and they don't know who I am. I wasn't opening up enough.
Well, and I was going to ask you too, did you feel that you had a lack of empathy or didn't have that empathy training or an appreciation for empathy as a young man? Growing up, you went on education. You obviously spent a lot of time in class and a lot of time in books by yourself. Do you feel like empathy just didn't have a chance to grow within you until you started experiencing such awkward circumstances and talking to people that you had to go and train yourself, educate yourself, and train yourself to become more empathetic to folks.
Yeah, I remember something about what you said reminds me of a time when I was in college. I was talking to a friend and we were talking something about making eye contact. And she said, yeah, Josh, you never make eye contact with me. And I know that you're paying attention because whenever I ask you stuff, you're right in there with it, but you don't make eye contact. And it was really uncomfortable for me to make eye contact with people for a long time. And I had to force myself to do it. And now I feel like if I don't make eye contact, I'm missing out on a lot of the communication. So I'm not sure if that's empathy, but there's like levels of connection and levels of openness that were really difficult for me to do. And developing them has improved my life. I took these acting lessons and that awoke a lot of, before that, I knew the importance of emotional awareness. I didn't really, and had worked on emotional awareness, but in acting, there's a lot of emotional expression because you don't want to watch an actor feeling on stage. You want to see them be behaving, in accordance with what they're feeling, and the other actors have to be able to read that off of you. So I learned a lot about expression there, and I learned about how what's going on inside the person is not necessarily, and is usually different than what's going on with what you see on the surface. And in acting, that adds to the richness of the character. If they're sitting there doing something at a desk, but they're really thinking about what, after they finish writing this letter, they better get off to the post office quick enough, because if they don't get it there quick enough, the aunt might not be able to do that thing. And they're thinking about their relationship with the aunt. And that's what's going on inside their head or in their heart. And if all you see is them writing a letter, you don't catch all of that. And in a leadership context, when people do stuff that isn't what you expect, then that tells you there's something inside that's different than what you observe from the outside. And that awareness is a big deal. There's something going on inside that I can't quite tell. 2, if I can get that out, then I can work with that. As a leader, you want to work with people's emotions, not just managers work with behavior. Leaders work much more with emotions and motivations. And so meaningful connection is a way to make people feel comfortable sharing that stuff that's inside that they generally don't let out because it makes them vulnerable. So what's going on inside and what you see on the outside are oftentimes it's not a big deal, but there's stuff that's inside that people want to share. They're not comfortable sharing, but if you can make them feel comfortable, they're going to open up to you and they're going to be glad that they did. And if you then give an outlet to what they shared with you that they're normally keeping inside, as a leader, that is, if you give them a task to work on that enables them to act on this thing, you imbue that task with meaning. So that is usually people, they work at a place because they like what the company does. They like what the organization does, even if it's not a company, even if it's a sports team or if it's just a group of people that are doing stuff together, something's motivating them. It's not just to do the task at hand. It's what's the company about, or what are their hopes and dreams? And if you can connect that to their work, then they do the work for themselves, not for you. And they'll often work very hard. And in fact, they'll want you to give them standards, to give them judgment, because when they have a standard to work for, now that gives them a measure of quality. And when any of us do stuff for ourselves, we want to do really well. Sorry, I'm getting caught up in I've jumped ahead to Unit 4 of the core of
oh, no, and that's fine. But, I think it's fascinating and worth repeating. Managers deal with behaviors, leaders deal with emotions. And if it comes down to motivation, what popped in my mind here is a very basic definition of motivation is using your words, imbuing a task with meaning. So it's not just a task, but you got to motivate them. You got to understand what that emotion is that is driving them beneath the surface in order for them to really take on that task and live into that task that changes behaviors. I had a very smart guy once tell me that stories shape the behaviors that create the cultures that drive epic performance. And you were just underscoring that here. Now, in your book and everything you've told me about your growth as a storyteller, as a leader, it almost feels like in reading your book that this is a bit of an autobiography of what you've experienced and what you've learned and how you are able to now communicate this and share it with your readers and your students.
Yeah, it's not a chronological telling, and it's not
right.
Nor is it even like here's the tension that needed to be resolved. But there's a lot. Someone who read that book and did the exercises would know me very well. They would certainly know my values. They'd know a lot of experiences that I went through, and they could easily lead me. They could easily, and I would love to be led by someone like that. In fact, one of the things about the book that I like is that I hope, it's only been out a couple months now, but I hope that it draws people to me that like this stuff and that like me. And I hope that it creates community. And I hope that it's not a call for people to find me out, but I certainly hope that people say, oh, that's someone that I would like to have in my life. I try to put myself out there. It's not as open and personal as a lot of fiction books are, but yeah, I try to put myself into it.
Well, you've done a beautiful job with it, and the exercises are quite amazing. I can't wait to dive into them even more. Where can people learn more about you and find your book?
So the book is available in all the usual places online. I mean, Amazon, Barnes & Noble are the big places. If you're in New York City, actually the Barnes & Noble in Union Square has some signed copies by me. So if you want signed copies, they're there. And spodekacademy.com, so SPODEK academy.com is where my online courses are available. And the courses give a more rich experience because there's an online forum that lets you work with the community, and you can work at your own pace. And I will create a page at spodekacademy.com/storytelling that'll give people a link to see the meaningful connection exercise that I do. I did a video of me doing it with Marshall Goldsmith, and that way people can see how I teach it. Well, Marshall Goldsmith knows how to make a meaningful connection, but you nonetheless see me going through the motions. And there's text underneath that says what's going on, and there's a chapter of the book there too. So if people go to spodekacademy.com/storytelling, there'll be that access, and that'll have all my social media stuff too, so they can go there.
Oh, fantastic. Josh, thank you so much for that. One last question to leave our listeners with. In all you've learned, taking academia into leadership, all you've learned as a business owner and entrepreneur yourself to an author to creating this, what is your biggest aha moment that came to you after writing this book?
It's not that everyone learned everything that people are good at. They learn from something, and you got to find the experience that some experience gave it to them. If you replicate that experience or something like it for yourself, you'll get that too. You just have to practice. So practice, the last words of my book, practice, practice, practice. It's how you get to Carnegie Hall. It's how you get to your potential in life as well. And people don't do it, but they'll practice a little bit and then they give up. But if you keep practicing, practice, practice, practice.
And we can all start with that authentic voice exercise. Start practicing that, and that's the beginning of, near the beginning of your book, and then read the book and have everything else roll out for us.
Yes, I keep being, I'm like, that's what I wanted to say. Yes, exactly. I agree.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time, and I want to turn you loose so you can go down and run by the river.
Thank you. I'll think about this conversation when I'm there, and I look forward to hearing it online.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. Of course, if I can help you with either your leadership storytelling, your brand storytelling for your personal brand to grow your influence, or your brand for your organization to help grow your company and your people, visit me over at businessofstory.com. Love to share all the insights and wonderful guests like Josh on the Business of Story podcast. And of course, if you like what you're hearing here, please jump over to iTunes and let your world know about it. I truly appreciate it. Until next week, when we will bring you another amazing story artist like Josh, have a wonderful life.